The bottle of Pinot Grigio was empty, and so was I. Another dinner party, another flawless performance. Or so I thought. Ben refilled my glass, eyebrows raised. That smirk. God, I could smack it right off his stupid face. Easy on the wine, Sarah. Don't want your aim to be off tomorrow. He always had to have the last word. Oh, like I'm worried about darts? My friends giggled. Ever since Ben got obsessed with those dumb tournaments, the jokes were endless. I should be used to it, but the thing is, they had a point. Ben was so predictable these days. It wasn't just the darts. Someone, was it Rachel's husband? Chimed in with something about how darts weren't a real sport. That's when I snapped. God knows why, but I did. At least it's a hobby. Unlike whatever Mark calls the crap he does with spreadsheets, I blurted out. Silence fell. Even worse than the smug look on Ben's face was the flicker of pity in Rachel's eyes. Later, after the dishes were done and the goodbyes said, I finally threw the mask off. You want me to call him weak? Fine. You've gone soft, Ben, and it's pathetic. I was yelling now, months of frustration spilling out in a messy, wine-fueled rant. He didn't even raise his voice. Why would you think I'd care, Sarah? Go to Mark tomorrow, do whatever you want, there it was. The infuriating calm of his, the maddening control. Don't act like you're the good guy here. Unless, I couldn't finish the thought. It was too cruel, too ridiculous. He couldn't be that twisted, could he? But that flat, dead look in his eyes. Don't bother, he said, already halfway up the stairs. It's already done. What the actual hell, done? What was done? Did he just give me a free pass to cheat? Was he setting me up? A million panicked questions whirled in my head as I collapsed on the sofa, the empty bottle my only company. Morning brought no answers, just a dull headache and a sense of dread coiling in my gut. My usual cool facade felt brittle. Mark was suddenly the last person on earth I wanted to see. But Ben, who'd always been so easy to read. He was a damn puzzle box, and I had no idea how to crack it open. The office felt like a fashion runway. Never mind that I work in insurance, not Vogue. Today, with my power blazer and the heels that make my legs look endless, I was ready to conquer the world. Or at least Mark, the unbearably hot numbers guy who actually made spreadsheets seem interesting. He did a textbook double take when I walked past his cubicle. Score. That afternoon was, well, let's just say Mark lived up to the Excel hype. I know. It was reckless, stupid even. But for the first time in ages, I felt that rush, dangerous, alive, wanted. It wasn't about revenge on Ben, not entirely, at least, it was about reclaiming my own damn life. That feeling lasted all of, 3 days. Then the paranoia kicked in. Whispers seemed louder. Did anyone see Mark slip me a note? Could my coworkers just sense the shift in me? Every ping of my phone could be Ben finding out, the perfect storm about to ruin whatever was left of my life. Ben. He added to the confusion. If he knew something was up, and with that poker face, how could I tell? He certainly wasn't acting like a scorned husband. One night, he made steak, my favorite, and didn't drop a snarky comment. Was he playing some long game, waiting for me to unravel? The worst part was that even with everything feeling off-kilter, I still craved that heat with Mark. But now it was tainted with this sick fascination with Ben. What was his plan? Sleep became impossible. Every night I'd creep downstairs, the house creaking around me like an accomplice. I dug through his desk, risked a peek at his phone. Nothing. Then, on laundry day, bingo. A receipt crumpled in his jeans pocket. Some seedy motel on the outskirts of town. Not our kind of place by a long shot. My first instinct was to confront him, throw everything in his face. But what if I was wrong, and I'd just reveal my own dirty secret? yet staying silent. The idea of him having another life I knew nothing about was eating me alive. So, I did what any self-respecting woman on the verge of losing it completely would. I started my own investigation. Browser history late at night, social media searches with fake accounts. I was becoming a regular Sherlock Holmes, except pathetic and terrified of getting caught. Mark was becoming an afterthought. A distraction when what my mind craved was the puzzle of Ben. Where did he sneak off to that damn duffel bag of his? Were the new shirts the subtle whiff of cologne meant for another woman? The questions swirled, sharper and more obsessive with each passing day. My world shrank. My job felt like an elaborate cover as I became Sarah the spy. I mapped out Ben's routine, memorized his train schedule, the coffee shop where he grabbed a muffin most mornings. Pathetic doesn't even begin to describe it. But I couldn't stop. Then, my sister of all people, the queen of small-town gossip, turned into an unexpected lifeline. Her bubbly phone call was supposed to be about some neighborhood drama, but as she rambled, my ears perked up. You know, I saw Ben heading downtown the other day, that area near the old factories. The seed was planted. I needed someone to talk to, but my usual crowd was out of the question. Who knew when loyalties might shift? Then it hit me. Janice. Quiet, always in the background. Janice from accounting. Turns out, underneath that mousy exterior is a Nancy Drew fan with an iron will. Over hurried lunches, I found my outlet, someone to theorize with about Ben's suspicious activities. The plan came together in a rush of adrenaline. Janice would take a sick day to cover my tracks, and I was going to play follow the leader. Ben disappeared down a dingy side street, into a building that screamed shady business. I swore if some bombshell blonde walked out, I might actually lose it. Instead, the sign on the door read, Hawthorne Investigations Discreet and Confidential. Wait, what? My legs went numb, not a love nest, but a damn detective agency? Was I the one being investigated? I felt sick, exposed. But under the nausea, a flicker of anger ignited. How dare he play me like this? Fine, two could play at this game. The lawyer's office felt almost sterile after the grimy street, but the woman behind the desk, all crisp suit and steely gaze, was exactly what I needed. No talk of divorce, just a cold, hard assessment of assets, loopholes, ways to protect myself. I left her office feeling strangely empowered. It was war, and this time, Ben wouldn't see me coming. The report sat untouched on my desk. My boss had made a comment about me, not being myself, that I was missing deadlines like I didn't already know that. Problem was, I couldn't stop checking my phone, waiting for a text from Janice, an update on whatever rabbit hole she was digging into about Ben. I was unraveling, and it was starting to show. Mark, sensing my distraction, turned up the charm, but what had felt exciting now just sent shivers down my spine. His touch, the way he said my name, it made me want to crawl out of my skin. The whole thing was tainted, not by Ben, but by this dread that his game was bigger than I ever imagined. My lifeline started to fray too. My friends, once sources of laughter and distraction, were now targets. Did they know anything? Did they pity me? It was in their eyes, those sidelong glances when Ben's name came up. The whispers were getting louder too, the ones that had nothing to do with me and Mark. Ben was supposedly seen with some woman, someone not me. A pang of jealousy, surprising and bitter, shot through me. But how could I confront him when my own guilt was a constant weight? Mark's office was my temporary, pathetic escape. But the way he looked at me across the desk wasn't comforting anymore, it was calculating. You need to clear your head, Sarah, he said, reaching for my hand. I have just the place. That's when I snapped, you really think a weekend getaway will fix this mess? I jerked back my hand. I know you think I'm vulnerable, easy. Newsflash, I'm not playing along anymore. His face hardened, the charm mask slipping. Home offered no peace, silence hung heavy in the air. Ben's absence was its own accusation. The meticulously tidy kitchen, the emptiness of the closet where his stupid duffel bag used to be. They mocked me. I couldn't take it anymore. Desperation, the kind I'd only seen in trashy reality shows, took over. His drawers, his briefcase, his laptop, off limits until now. I found the file an hour later, tucked in the back of his desk. Not love letters, not clues about a mistress, but photos of me. Me leaving Mark's apartment, me laughing with him. Everything meticulously dated and labeled. The sound of the front door cut through my daze. There he stood, the look on his face a twisted kind of satisfaction. Ready to talk now, Sarah? A scream lodged in my throat. Not at him, but at myself. Was I such a fool that I hadn't seen this coming? I sank to the floor, proof of my own stupidity scattered around me. But even in that sickening moment, some flicker of defiance refused to be stamped out. So what? My voice sounded weak, pathetic even to my own ears. You played detective, big deal. Is that supposed to make everything okay? Make you the good guy? His answer was to push another photo across the table. Me and my sister at lunch, caught mid-conversation. Janice, my supposed ally, was on his payroll all along? I felt physically ill. Don't make this about me, Sarah. This isn't about anger or revenge, at least not in the way you think. His infuriating calm voice cut through the roaring in my ears. Then why, saying it out loud made it all seem even more insane. Why would he go to such lengths just to prove I was horrible? We both knew that already. The doorbell rang, the shrill sound shattering my thoughts. Ben answered, and a woman's voice drifted into the room. A stranger's voice, and less. My head whipped up. Rachel, what in the holy hell was she doing here? She looked almost apologetic until she met my eyes. Then, a cold smirk I recognized all too well. Mark was getting clingy, so I figured I'd cash in while I could. Her words barely registered until Ben, the emotionless bastard, actually smiled. Rachel here played her part beautifully. It was surprisingly easy to find someone eager to exploit a bored, unhappy wife. The words landed like punches. Everything slotted into place. The accidental meetings, the hotel, all a sickening play staged just for me. That's when he laid out his plan, coldly logical, more about financial leverage than broken hearts. My indiscretions were the perfect blackmail. I tuned out the legal jargon, the threats barely veiled. It was the last thing he said that finally broke through the numbness. Don't pretend this came out of nowhere, Sarah. You ignored me, belittled me, made me feel invisible. This is about being seen again, on my terms. He wasn't yelling, but there was a raw intensity that made me flinch. There was no escape, no argument, no clever retort to salvage this wreck. I was the loser in a game I didn't even know I'd been playing. He left, and Rachel, after a final twist of the knife about my gullibility, followed. I was alone, my world reduced to those damning photographs and the echo of my own humiliation. I didn't recognize myself in the bathroom mirror. Bloodshot eyes, yesterday's makeup smeared, this was the face of someone broken. A noise from downstairs, a reminder that I wasn't the only one awake in the house of betrayals. I couldn't face Ben now, couldn't even stomach the sight of him. The front door creaked open. I didn't move, didn't want to see him, to hear whatever fresh torture he'd planned. But the voice that floated up wasn't his. Sarah, are you okay, Janice? I sagged with relief. Or was it more complicated? Was this yet another piece of his elaborate plan? She didn't offer excuses or pity, just a cup of tea and a quiet presence on the sofa. Once, I would have laughed at the idea of finding comfort in my mousy accountant. But this was the lifeline I needed. When I told her everything, I expected judgment. What I got was a surprising kind of understanding. He won this round, Sarah, she said. But he doesn't get to win everything. It wasn't optimism, it was pure grit. And, crazy as it seemed, it was contagious. The town, or so it felt, closed ranks against me. Whispers in the grocery store, averted gazes. It was worse than the humiliation of the affair. This was the loss of any pretense of belonging. Ben, of course, remained oddly untouched by it all, the ever-devoted husband, a pillar of the community. When the lawyer called, the one I'd seen as my protector, the news was bleak. Every loophole closed off, every attempt to gain leverage over Ben utterly crushed. A new level of low hit when even she hinted at a settlement to make it go away. Mark saw his chance too. No more Mr. Nice Guy routine. A little thank you for old time's sake wouldn't go amiss, he said, Lear replacing the concerned colleague act. That's when something in me shifted. Not hope, but the opposite. A pure, blinding rage. Screw this town, screw the job, screw them all. They could have the pathetic version of Sarah, the one who begged and bargained. This new Sarah, fueled by nothing but anger? She would make them pay. The visit to Ben wasn't about pleading. The spark in my eyes must have startled him. No tears, just a cold, clear question. You really think this will give you anything resembling a decent life? He didn't answer, maybe because for the first time, he couldn't predict my next move. Walking out of that house, past the meticulously trimmed lawn and the tidy, empty rooms, felt different. It wasn't defeat, it might not be victory yet, but it was the start of something. What that something was, even I wasn't sure. But there's a certain power in having nothing left to lose. The coffee shop was generic enough to blend in. Chain stores, predictable menus, a welcome anonymity in this city I still didn't quite call my own. 5 years, a lifetime ago. Sometimes my hand still twitched for an old phone, my pulse quickened at the sight of a vaguely familiar car. But the Sarah who lived here, Sarah Smith, no-nonsense haircut, sensible shoes, she wouldn't crumble at those ghosts. Ms. Smith, your order's ready. The barista's smile was impersonal, a relief compared to the pitying glances back home. Yet, even here, the past had a way of sneaking up. The woman who rushed past my table, a flash of recognition, quickly masked. An ex-co-worker, a client from my old life? Shame and defiance battled inside me, the familiar cocktail of emotions that was my constant companion now. The work wasn't glamorous, caseworker at a women's shelter. Some days were heartbreakingly grim, others sparked a fierce pride. These women, their stories. They were reminders that I wasn't the only one who'd fallen hard, the only one scrambling back to her feet. News of Ben reached me like a faded postcard. His business failing, a messy divorce, no surprise there, something vague about a legal mess. I allowed myself a grim smile. Had he finally overplayed his hand? Was there some twisted satisfaction in seeing the architect of my downfall stumble? Or maybe that was proof I hadn't healed as much as I pretended. The encounter with Rachel was the true shock. A farmer's market of all places. She looked older, tired. No triumphant smirk, just a flicker of awkward recognition. A mumbled, sorry about everything, before she hurried away. Was that genuine remorse, or simply regret for a gig gone wrong? Then, him, Mark, turning up with that same practiced charm. The offer was thinly veiled, his expanding business, a consultant, position, a comfortable life. He'd assumed my desperation made me his old Mark, easily manipulated. He misread the coldness in my eyes. You haven't changed, Mark. Still preying on people when they're down. Seeing his confusion turn to anger, it was a twisted kind of victory. The walk home was longer than usual. My apartment was small, sparse, but it was mine. No echoes of Ben's footsteps, no carefully curated surfaces hiding an empty heart. Sunlight slanted through the window, and I found myself staring, not at the cityscape, but inward. What was this life I'd cobbled together? Was there room for anything resembling happiness? Maybe not the easy kind, but something built on hard-won truths, the strength found in broken places. I didn't have the answers, just the stubborn belief that rock bottom might just have been the only place where I could truly start. The bathroom mirror was fogged up from my shower, and I couldn't resist. My finger traced a little heart on the steam. Giggling, I quickly wiped it away, a ridiculous grin spreading across my face. I hadn't felt this lighthearted in, well, I wasn't sure how long. Something shifted in me as I got ready for work. Maybe it was that dumb heart on the mirror. I slid my wedding ring off, letting it spin on my finger. The cool bareness of my skin felt strange, but thrilling too. Like I was shedding a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. I tucked the ring back on before I could think too hard about it, but the sensation lingered. He's overreacting. Like, seriously, I complained to Sarah over our lattes. Our Thursday ritual. Just because I get a text sometimes. It's probably work stuff, he shouldn't jump to conclusions. Maybe, Sarah said, but she didn't look totally convinced. I rolled my eyes. Honestly, sometimes I wondered if she thrived on the drama more than I did. Still, a little flicker of doubt poked at me. Did I sound too defensive? Was it obvious I was hiding something? Later that day, fixing my hair in the office bathroom, I felt his eyes on me when I reached for my phone. The familiar crease appeared in his brow, that look of worry that was starting to grate on my nerves. Whoa, what? My laugh was a little too sharp. Can't I have a little privacy? But his face stayed tight, and I fumbled for an excuse. Gotta run, sorry. I grabbed my bag and practically fled the office. In my pocket, my fingers traced the crumpled paper. The little cafe, tucked away on a street he'd never suspect. I had to meet him there soon. I'd never done anything like this, not really. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Was that guilt or anticipation? Honestly, I wasn't sure anymore, and in a twisted way, I didn't want to be. The unknown, the thrill of it, it felt intoxicating after so long in the same, predictable routine. That night, his scent clung to my pillow stronger than it ever had. I lay there, my stomach churning. I tried to convince myself it was just laundry day, something changed in the wash, but it was his cologne, amplified in the quiet of the night. The guilt was a weight on my chest, but underneath, a flicker of something else. Was it desire I felt, or just the thrill of being caught? The next day with my brother, Mark, was agony. Every time I thought about the cafe, about meeting him there, Mark's offhand comment would bounce around my skull. Someone's got a crush, he'd said, and his smirk was back when I met his eyes over lunch. Shut up, I mumbled through a forced smile, my cheeks burning. He laughed, and I tried to steer the conversation towards safer topics, but the damage was done. Did he know? Could he tell something was up? The lies came easier now, almost automatic. Late meeting, I told my husband when I came home 2 hours after I was supposed to. His nod was clipped, tight. The phone in my pocket vibrated. I pretended not to notice, but my hand twitched towards it, itching to check the coded message that waited there. I had to get a hold of myself. This thing with, well, whoever he was, it was getting sloppy. Walking home, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a darkened window. My eyes looked brighter, my cheeks flushed. Was this happiness? The word felt wrong, like a lie in itself. I couldn't kid myself anymore, it was the deception, the wrongness of it all, that made me, was it radiant? He thought I was glowing, and he was so far off the mark. Later, in the kitchen, his fingers brushed mine. Accidental, like always, but it was like lightning through my veins. The guilt, and the twisted rush of sneaking around, wrestled inside me. I pulled my hand away quickly. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on mine for a beat too long. Did he know, or was I just projecting my own paranoia onto him? It was maddening. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies were choking me. So, I put on the red dress. The one I bought, the one he'd never even noticed. The defiance felt good, a flicker of something that wasn't guilt or shame. Looking at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Was this the woman who was sneaking around, lying through her teeth? I felt powerful. That buzz in my pocket, the one reserved for him. My fingers shook as I reached for it. Can't sleep, you? It read. It wasn't even midnight, and already he was pushing. It was too much sometimes, how demanding he could be. Me neither, I typed, the words coming automatically. I tucked the phone away, a familiar tightness coiling in my chest. I knew this had to stop. Soon. He was always more present in my dreams now. His laughter in place of my husband's gentle snore, his hands where they shouldn't be. When I woke up, it was with a jolt, a mix of longing and dread washing over me. The next morning, my husband was in the garage, staring at our bikes. The ones we bought with such excitement, imagining long rides together. They were collecting dust now. Hey, I trailed off. He didn't look at me. When he finally did, the hurt in his eyes made my heart twist uncomfortably. Wanna, go for a ride this weekend? His voice was tentative, hopeful. It should have made my resolve stronger. Instead, it felt like a trap. Sure, I said, the lie a bitter pill on my tongue. Because I knew exactly what I'd be doing that weekend instead. And this time, the guilt stabbed at me with a force I hadn't expected. I started making excuses. To myself, to my husband, to anyone who'd listen. I need to run a quick errand, or I have a work thing downtown. And then I'd be at the cafe, sitting at our usual table, waiting for him to walk through the door. Our conversations were electrifying. It wasn't just the secrecy, although that definitely fueled it. There was a way he looked at me, listened to me, like I was the most interesting person in the world. I was starting to forget how that felt with my husband. The lies were getting easier. Like a muscle, the more I used it, the stronger it got. But easier didn't mean guilt-free. The lies slithered around my heart, tighter and tighter with each one. Still, I couldn't stop. He was becoming. Well, I didn't like the word addiction, but I was starting to see how it could happen. Dinner with my mom was a disaster waiting to happen. Something's different about you, darling, she said, studying me over her wine glass. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple. Different how? My laugh sounded too high, too fake, even to my own ears. Happier, I think, she mused, and I couldn't meet her gaze. Because she was right, in a twisted, wrong kind of way. And that guilt, the one that felt like constant motion sickness, it was starting to fade. The receipt in his pocket was like a bomb going off. A tiny, crumpled bomb in his jeans. The place was swanky, somewhere we could never afford, and definitely somewhere we'd never been together. My heart pounded in my ears. What the hell was he hiding? Was he? No, I wouldn't even let my mind finish the thought. But the seed of doubt was planted. That night, lying in bed next to him, was different. When he rolled over, his hand brushing mine, it used to feel like comfort, like home. Now, it made my skin crawl. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly things had changed. And wondering what came next, how long until it all came crashing down. His smiles had gone brittle. The warmth in his eyes was slowly fading, replaced by something cold and distant. It was like a mirror shattering. I could see the pieces, the change, but I couldn't face what it meant. He was onto me, I knew it with the same gut-wrenching certainty I knew I couldn't stop seeing the other guy. One night, after my husband fell asleep, something twisted inside me snapped. I had to know. It was pure desperation, a reckless lunge towards the answer I was terrified of. His phone. I knew it was wrong, but I slid it from his nightstand anyway. My fingers trembled as I navigated menus, looking for anything, a clue, a name, anything that confirmed what my heart already knew. Nothing. Then it struck me, voicemail. There was one unread message. I pressed play, holding my breath. A woman's voice, low and soft. Not mine. Can't wait to see you, she breathed. I fumbled, deleting the message every second, an agonizing stretch of time. He stirred beside me, and I froze, shoving the phone under the duvet just as his eyes fluttered. "You okay?" he mumbled, the sleep slurring his words. "Fine, just bad dream," I lied, my voice thin and unconvincing. My lover was different too. His touch felt demanding, no longer thrilling. The secrecy that once fueled our liaisons now felt suffocating. And with the thrill gone, the guilt was louder than ever. Yet, I kept going back. Like I was on autopilot, unable to stop the inevitable crash I knew was coming. Then, he left work early. A surprise. My heart slammed into my ribs. Frantically, I erased messages, swept away any crumbs of evidence that would betray me. Just as I stuffed the last incriminating note into my pocket, the front door creaked open. I didn't know what I'd say, what lies I could spin. Instead, I found myself frozen in place, a deer caught in headlights. He didn't yell, didn't even raise his voice more than a few notches. Instead, he looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes, it was worse than any screaming match. Disappointment, hurt, I felt like I was shrinking in front of him. The lies came tumbling out of my mouth. Excuses, deflections, half-truths twisting in the air between us. Useless. He saw right through me. Each word I uttered was like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. We fought then, voices ragged, bouncing off the walls of our once happy home. The truth came out, spilling like poison. Every detail felt like a knife I was twisting into both of us. When it was finally over, there was just silence. A hollow, echoing silence that screamed louder than the fight itself. I don't even remember what he said, only that he looked so tired, so broken. It made the guilt a physical thing, lodged in my throat. The phone call to my sister-in-law was a desperate grasp for comfort. Her voice was soft, laced with pity, not the anger I expected, and that just made it worse. "I always knew," she whispered. Always knew, everyone knew but me, the shame burned. For some reason I couldn't fathom, I found myself seeking out my dad. The man who had barely spoken to me in years since other bad choices I'd made. But there I was, on his doorstep, my whole world in shambles. He didn't say much, just listened, offered tea I couldn't drink. His quiet understanding felt more damning than any judgment. Sleep, forget it, my mind was a hamster wheel of questions, of self-hate. Was this thrill, this addiction to someone new, the only way I could shake the dullness out of my life? Was the cost, my whole marriage, ever going to feel worth it? The answers didn't come. Only the harsh truth that I had built this choice by painful choice. And now I'd have to live with the consequences. It wasn't a surprise, exactly. But seeing it, the word of divorce, printed in that soulless official font, hit me like a gut punch. My legs gave out, and I stank onto the kitchen chair, the paper crumpling in my trembling hand. This was real. The life I knew, for all its flaws, was shattering beyond repair. He, the man who was once my thrill, my secret, wouldn't let it go easy. His calls started as whimpers, then grew into pathetic begs. Finally, the accusation. "This is your fault." He screamed it down the line, his voice barely recognizable. The glow of excitement had long faded from him. In its place, I saw his weakness. His desperation. It wasn't attractive. But somewhere, buried under the wreckage, I felt a different kind of pain. It wasn't for him, but for us. For what my husband and I once shared. All those plans, the whispered dreams at night, was it all a lie? Had it all been so fragile? My throat tightened, a sob building. The courtroom was a blur of sterile walls and legals. Across the aisle, I saw him. He looked smaller somehow, older. We didn't speak, didn't need to. The chasm between us was wider than any ocean. The judge's gavel brought a strange sort of relief. Finality. My best friend. Well, I couldn't blame her for turning away. Sarah, who knew me inside and out, who held me when boys in high school broke my heart. She couldn't look at me without a mix of disgust and sorrow. I couldn't blame her, not really. Just another casualty in this mess I had made. Some nights, I let myself cry. Not for my lover, he was a ghost now. Not even for my marriage. There was nothing left to mourn there. But for the life I thought I wanted, the future I envisioned. I mourned the woman I thought I was, the woman he thought I was. That woman was gone. In her place, I wasn't sure yet who would emerge from the ashes. The encounter was so random it almost felt like a sign. There I was, in line at the post office, when a familiar voice called my name. Mrs. Evans, my high school English teacher. We'd always gotten along, but it had been, almost 15 years? So, dear, she said, peering at me over half-moon glasses, what are you up to these days? Her eyes were kind, not judging. And that's when I spilled it all. The affair, the divorce, the crushing sense of worthlessness. Somehow, it was easier with her, a stranger now. Maybe because I knew she hadn't seen me, hadn't loved me, before all this. To my surprise, she didn't gasp or scold. We all rebuild, she said gently. Sometimes, we have to tear things down to the studs first. I choked out a laugh. Was that a building metaphor, or a confession of her own? It didn't matter, just hearing it out loud made it feel less catastrophic. The red dress hung in my closet like a taunt. I took it down, stared at my reflection. The woman in that dress, the one hungry for excitement? Danger? She wasn't me anymore. Or maybe, she was a part of me I had buried too deep. Donating it to charity felt like an exorcism. Watching him pack was agonizing. Each sock, each folded shirt, was a chip off the wall between us. I wanted to scream, stop. But what was there left to fight for? Promises, love, all gone, ash in the fireplace of my own making. The car door slammed. I stood on that empty doorstep and felt the finality of it wash over me like cold rain. We hadn't spoken a word, didn't need to, the empty half of the garage was more eloquent than any goodbye could ever be. The house, it wasn't a home anymore, just a big, silent place full of ghosts. I sat there, in the quiet of our failed togetherness. But among the echoes, a question flickered. Okay, so this was the rubble of my life. What would I build from it? Who would I build from it? The answers wouldn't come easy. But, for the first time in a long time, there was a tiny glimmer where the despair used to be. Maybe, just maybe, some things could be rebuilt stronger. I hated therapy at first. All that forced digging into emotions felt more like ripping open an unhealed wound. Plus, the therapist, Dr. Lewis, with his wire-rimmed glasses and calm voice, made me vaguely suspicious. Like he could see right through me, all the stupid choices I'd made. But after a few tear-filled sessions, something shifted. It became a place I could fling around anger, messy guilt, and even pinpricks of hope, without judgment. Those tangled emotions started to feel less like monsters and more like puzzle pieces I just didn't know how to put back together yet. One afternoon, I walked past the dusty bikes in the garage. They had turned into symbols of a life abandoned, of promises broken. I hesitated, then grabbed a rag and started polishing the chrome. My reflection looked back at me, blurry through the dust. Was that the woman I wanted to be? The one who gave up? Mark's text made me smile. A simple, "here when you need me," had more weight than 1,000 fancy words ever could. Maybe trust wasn't entirely shattered. Maybe it could heal, scar tissue and all. My friends took some coaxing. At first, our outings felt forced, laughter tinged with awkwardness. But as the weeks passed, something genuine started to shine through. Their concern was real, their jokes made me forget the mess for precious minutes at a time. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be with people who knew me, flaws and all, and still cared. Taking care of myself was the hardest. Baths felt indulgent, reading a book was an extravagance when there were dishes to do, a house to fix up. But one evening I found myself lighting a candle, the fancy one I'd never used, and sinking into the tub. It felt strange at first, but a quiet calm settled over me. Taking care of myself. Maybe that wasn't selfish. Maybe it was the first wobbly step on the long, hard road to getting back to feeling like a whole person, not just the wreckage of one. Volunteering wasn't my idea of a good time. It was Mark's doing. Get out of your head, he'd nudged. And before I could blink, he'd sign me up at the local food bank. The first day was awkward. I felt like a fraud. Here I was, sorting canned goods and bagging rice, when my own life was in shambles. But watching other people struggle, people with real problems, shifted something in me. Their resilience in the face of hardship made my self-pity seem small. The apology letters were Dr. Lewis' idea. He said it wasn't about getting closure for the other person, but about clearing space in myself. So I wrote them. To my ex-husband, full of the remorse I should have felt earlier. To my parents, my friends, to my old self. Some letters ended up crumpled in the trash. Others felt cleansing to mail. Whether the recipients would ever forgive me was irrelevant, it was about starting to forgive myself. My wedding ring still sat in its box on my dresser. It was the weight of 1,000 bad decisions. Sometimes I'd pick it up, rolling it between my fingers. Then I'd put it back. Was it a reminder of failure, or a symbol of survival? I wasn't sure yet. On the bus the other day, this guy across from me smiled. Not a creepy smile, just nice. And, just for a second, I smiled back. It felt rusty, that muscle, like it hadn't been used in ages. But then I remembered laughing with friends, real laughter, just a few weeks ago. Maybe those tiny flickers of joy were getting stronger, slowly but surely. In the bathroom mirror, the bags under my eyes were still there, the lines etched a bit deeper. This face had seen more pain than I ever imagined. But there was a spark in the eyes now, a defiance even. This woman, I wasn't sure who she was becoming. But she was stronger than the woman who'd broken everything apart, that much I knew. And stronger meant a whole world of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to see in a... The conference room buzzed with the same stale energy as always. Mark shifted in his chair, trying not to let his mind wander to the pile of laundry waiting for him at home. Another slide flickered on the screen, graphs, projections, the kind of stuff that made his eyelids heavy. As the speaker droned on, his gaze drifted across the room, and that's when he saw her. Sarah, he didn't even know her name yet, but there was something about her. She was laughing, not at the presentation, but at something someone had whispered in her ear. Her eyes sparkled, brighter than the fluorescent lights. It had been years since he'd felt a jolt like that, a flicker of something exciting. He knew he shouldn't be staring, but he couldn't seem to look away. Later, at the hotel bar, he found himself inexplicably drawn to her. Okay, maybe not so inexplicable. She was beautiful, clearly smart from those few interactions he'd overheard, and there was an ease about her. Can I buy you a drink? He asked before his brain could catch up with his mouth. She smiled, a slow, amused smile he felt right down to his toes. Sure, but only if you promise not to talk about sales projections. They talked, a lot, about everything it seemed, from frustrating clients to childhood dreams they'd tucked away long ago. With Sarah, he didn't feel like tired, old Mark, the one who made dad jokes and fixed leaky faucets. He didn't even notice Susan's usual evening check-in text. He was having the kind of conversation that felt electric. The kind he and Susan hadn't had in years. The night stretched out way past what felt reasonable for a work conference. Their drinks were replaced, their laughter probably a little too loud. At one point, while walking her back to her hotel room, it hit him. This was dumb. Susan would kill him, Sarah was trouble, but then there was her smile at the door, and a good night, Mark, that sounded a lot more like an invitation than a farewell. The image of Susan, back at home asleep, probably in her worn-out college t-shirt, snapped into focus. God, he felt like crap. It was one night, one stupid night. Just a bit of harmless fun. He'd forget about Sarah in the morning. Mark did his best to convince himself as he drifted off to sleep. Mark had always prided himself on being a predictable guy. Order the same burger, wear the same gray socks every Tuesday, that was him. Routines made him feel safe, in control. But that night, with Sarah across the table, the familiar buzz of red wine in his veins, something in him shifted. They moved from the restaurant to a little wine bar tucked away on a side street. He usually hated places like that, too crowded, too loud. But with Sarah, it was different. She ordered a bottle of something he couldn't pronounce, and he laughed, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle he used with clients. Tell me something, she leaned in, her voice low. If you could do anything, change anything about your life right now, what would it be? He should have told her about the kids, their college funds, his stupid but steady job. But those words felt heavy in his mouth. Instead, he thought about the half-finished basement project, his old band t-shirt shoved in a drawer, that fishing trip with his dad he'd kept putting off. I don't know, he said finally, and damn if it didn't sound desperate, even to his own ears. The night blurred after that. More wine, a taxi ride, the feel of her keycard against his palm in the hotel hallway. It was so wrong, he knew that with a bone-deep certainty. Yet, the moment that door swung open, the wave of regret was washed away by something hotter, bolder. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be reckless. Waking up beside Sarah in those crisp white hotel sheets was like being dunked in ice water. The shame rushed in, a full-body shiver that made him nauseous. Mark fumbled for his clothes, mumbled something about an early meeting, and fled the room. On the cab ride back to the conference center, he stared out the window and repeated the same phrase over and over in his head. One time. One stupid, stupid time. He could fix this. He and Susan, they'd weathered tough times before. This would just be a blip, a mistake he'd never make again. I found myself checking my phone more than usual. Not to call Mark, I couldn't bring myself to do that, but just in case. It was stupid, every buzz, every chime sent a jolt of panic through me. What if it was him, fumbling for an excuse about a late meeting? Worse, what if it was her? The worst one came a couple of days later. Just 3 words. Last night was. My thumb hovered over that delete button. I didn't even need to see the rest. No name, no picture, but I knew. That sinking feeling in my stomach, it was the same one from when I was a kid, caught with a hand in the cookie jar. Mark was jumpy too. At first, I figured it was work stress, some big project going off the rails. But then came the flowers, a vase of wilted roses from the grocery store that he tried to pass off as some special occasion. He started taking the kids out for ice cream on random weeknights, asking me all these questions about my day. Questions he usually couldn't be bothered to remember the answers to. It was pathetic, watching him try so hard. Like if he just played the perfect husband, the guilt would disappear. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to shake him and make him confess. But another, colder part of me, just sat back and watched the show. There were moments I thought about texting her, telling her to back off, threatening her, something. But that felt desperate, and what would I even say? Hi, it's Mark's boring old wife, please leave my leftovers alone? Pathetic. Instead, I started paying attention. Late nights on his laptop after I'd gone to bed, hushed phone calls when he thought I was in the shower. He was slipping up, getting sloppy. And with each little slip, that anger inside me grew. Not the hot, explosive kind. More like a low burn, a steady fire I was going to let simmer until I was ready. The day Mark's next work trip was announced, my stomach dropped. Same damn city, same hotel chain even, from what I could tell on that stupid corporate booking website. I told myself not to be paranoid, that he'd learned his lesson. Maybe he had, but I wasn't the type to trust that easily anymore. I started planning, not big plans, just little things. A new haircut, the kind that made me feel a bit sharper, bolder. A few late nights, working at my friend Beth's house so there wouldn't be an empty bed waiting for Mark when he got back. It might sound petty, but each small action made me feel a bit less helpless, a bit more in control. Then came Sarah's email, landed in my inbox with an innocent subject line about some project they had collaborated on months ago. Just a quick follow-up question, totally work-related, but there it was, her name staring up at me, a little jolt of poison. At first, I ignored it, hit delete and went about my day. That night though, when Mark was snoring beside me, I found myself scrolling through my deleted folder. Her message was still there, a little digital landmine just waiting to go off. I told myself it was research, just checking what she was up to, gauging the threat level. But as soon as I hit reply, I knew I was lying. The words flowed easily, a back and forth about reports and meetings, sprinkled with a little casual flirtation. Nothing major, nothing even Mark would notice if he stumbled across it. Yet, those few sent lines felt like throwing a match into a gasoline can. The next morning, I felt sick with guilt. And something else, a thrill, it had been so long since I felt anything close to excitement. Talking to Sarah, it was like a jolt of electricity after years of numbness. Was this what Mark felt with her? That buzz of possibility, of danger? The thought made my blood boil. Mark was gone again, another project, another late-night flight. I'd packed his suitcase with practiced efficiency, the same shirts, the same toiletries, the same half-hearted kiss goodbye. A knot formed in my stomach as I watched him pull out of the driveway. It wasn't sadness anymore, more like a dull ache, the kind you get used to. The house felt too big, too empty with him gone. The kids had their own busy live school, friends, all the stuff that had filled the spaces Mark and I used to occupy. That first night, I poured myself a glass of wine, a big one, and turned on some mindless reality TV. But I couldn't focus on the manufactured drama. Instead, I found myself on Google Maps, staring at that damn hotel from his last trip. It was stupid, I knew. But as I scrolled through photos of the lobby, the generic bar, something shifted in me. It wasn't jealousy exactly, more a kind of cold determination. The lies were the worst part. Traffic was crazy, he'd say, pulling in well past midnight. Or, the client dinner ran late. He thought he was slick, but his excuses were getting weaker with each repetition. I stopped calling him out on it, let him think he was getting away with it. It made it all the more satisfying when I'd find those little pieces of evidence. A receipt for a fancy restaurant stuffed in his coat pocket, a text from an unknown number just a little too late at night. I started keeping a notebook. Dates, times, inconsistencies in his stories. It felt a bit crazy, a bit obsessive. But each time I jotted something down, it was like taking back a tiny sliver of control. Sometimes I'd fantasize about confronting him, throwing the notebook at his feet, screaming, "Explain this." But I knew how that would end. Denials, excuses, maybe even a few tears on his part. And in the end, I'd still be stuck in this marriage, just more bitter, more resentful than before. No, I needed a better plan. One that would leave him scrambling, not me. Chicago this weekend, babe. Some big client thing, Mark mumbled from the bedroom, tossing wrinkled clothes into his suitcase. If he was a better liar, he'd at least try to sound apologetic. I tried to muster up some fake disappointment, something about missing him for a few days. But the words stuck in my throat. It was easier to just nod, offer a quick, "have a good trip," and watch him go. He wasn't going to Chicago, I knew that much. This time, the lies didn't even bother me. It had become a kind of morbid game, one I was pretty sure I was winning. The minute he was out the door, I was on my laptop. First stop, those discount travel booking sites. Not the corporate ones he used for work, the cheaper ones for last-minute romantic getaways. I searched by dates, narrowed it down to the general region where I knew Sarah lived. Bingo. a cozy bed and breakfast, about 2 towns over from her place. The name of the reservation was a woman's, a name I didn't recognize. And it wasn't booked with his work email either, but a personal one I'd forgotten he even had. The proof was right there in black and white, a confirmation number and a little heart emoji next to the dates. I felt a surge of disgust and something else too. A strange kind of satisfaction. Our anniversary was a couple of weeks later. Mark, ever predictable, made reservations at the same overpriced Italian place we went to every year. He even bought me the usual pearl necklace, like he was checking off items on a to-do list, not celebrating a woman he supposedly loved. Sitting across from him, watching him raise a glass to us, was almost comical. The man barely knew me anymore. Maybe he never really did. It made the lies he'd been feeding me feel even more pathetic. I could barely touch my food, the guilt choking him, not me. I was playing a longer game, making plans he couldn't even fathom. It was only a matter of time until those plans came to fruition, and he'd be the one left blindsided. I picked the fight on a Wednesday. He was on his laptop, probably emailing Sarah or looking up romantic weekend spots. I slammed my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter, making him jump. "What's gotten into you lately?" I asked. No small talk, no gentle hinting. I was done with that. Mark did that thing he always does when he's caught off guard, the nervous half laugh, the scratching the back of his neck. "Nothing, why, is something wrong?" He was so bad at this, it was almost embarrassing. "Don't play dumb, Mark. We both know what's going on." My voice came out sharper than I'd intended. He tried the tired excuses. Stressed at work, project deadlines, the usual crap. But I cut him off. Told him about the Chicago trip that wasn't to Chicago, the little B&B I'd found online. I didn't mention her name, kept it vague, but he knew. The color drained from his face. The fight was ugly, yelling, accusations, the kids huddled in their rooms pretending not to hear. At one point he blurted out, "At least she makes me feel alive." It was like being punched in the gut. Then, just as quickly as it started, it petered out. We just stared at each other, the space between us filled with a silence heavier than any words could be. Finally, he mumbled some pathetic apology, grabbed his jacket, and left. I heard the garage door rumble open, his car backing down the driveway. He knew where he'd be going. The next day came the pressure from her. An email popped up on his phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter. Something about needing a decision, about not waiting around forever. My hands shook as I deleted it, trying to block out the images it had conjured in my mind. Mark came home late, smelling of cheap cologne and desperation. I'd already packed a few things for the kids and me. We stayed with my sister that night. My plan was starting to take shape, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of something like hope. It wasn't the sweet, innocent kind of hope from before. It was something sharper, something more determined. It was the kind of hope that would help me survive what came next. Mark tried to be discreet, sneaking around on his phone whenever I wasn't looking, deleting his browser history obsessively. But I wasn't an idiot. Late one night, I heard what sounded like muffled whispers coming from the guest bedroom. I pushed the door open and there he was, hunched over his laptop with a panicked expression on his face. "What are you doing?" I tried to keep my voice even, but a tremor ran through it. He slammed the laptop shut so quickly it almost fell off the bed. "Nothing, just checking some work emails," he stammered. At midnight, my laugh was harsh, humorless. "Come on, Mark, just how long do you think you can keep this up?" He tried to explain, mumbling something about a potential new apartment, a fresh start. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so damn pathetic. He was grasping at straws, and I think he knew it. The worst one came a few nights later. The shrill ring of his phone pierced the silence of our bedroom, jolting me awake. Sarah flashed across the screen, a name I'd only whispered in my darkest moments. Mark fumbled for it, hitting the silence button in panic. "Who's Sarah?" I asked, sitting straight up in bed. My voice was cold as ice. He made up some story about a new coworker, a project they were collaborating on. It was the weakest lie I'd ever heard, but the fight was gone out of me. I just lay back down, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. The next morning, the words weren't necessary. We both knew the truth. It hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. When I looked at him, I no longer saw my husband. He was a stranger, a man who'd been lying to me for God knows how long. That day I started making calls. To a lawyer, to a realtor, to anyone who could help me unravel the life we'd built. It felt strange, moving these pieces around, planning for a future that didn't include him. Yet, with every call, every form filled out, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was finally taking control of my own story. I stopped talking to Mark. Not in a dramatic, screaming way that would take more energy than I had left. But the casual conversations we used to have, about the kids' schedules or what to make for dinner, those were gone. He noticed, of course. He'd hover in doorways, open his mouth as if to speak, then close it again. The silence stretched out between us like a yawning chasm. And in that silence, I made my plans. It wasn't about dramatic gestures. No throwing his clothes out on the lawn or smashing his precious golf clubs. It was the small things. A few of my things disappearing into a suitcase, quiet phone calls with my mom, my eyes scanning apartment listings late at night after I thought he was asleep. One evening, he finally broke. He found me in the kitchen, my hands clenched around a mug of cold tea. His voice was hoarse, almost pleading, "Susan, please. We need to talk about this." And that's when I let it all out. Not just the affair, though God knows that was bad enough. But the years of neglect, of him taking me for granted, of me feeling so lonely in my own marriage. I told him how I used to wake up in the middle of the night and wish it were all just a bad dream. He tried to interrupt, to apologize. "I know I screwed up. I'll do anything, we can get counseling, anything." I cut him off with a raised hand. "It's too late, Mark. Way too late." The look on his face was something between shock and despair. He mumbled something about still loving me, about wanting to fix things. But his words held no weight. They were as hollow as the promises he'd broken so many times before. "Love?" I scoffed. "Do you even know what that word means anymore?" The silence descended again. I picked up my tea and turned away. As far as I was concerned, the conversation was over. There was nothing left to say. I had a future to build, one that no longer involved him. I found the apartment on a quiet street lined with old oak trees, just a short drive from the kids' school. It was small, barely more than a bedroom and a combined kitchen-living area. But it was mine. There was something so satisfying about signing that lease with my own name, no mark scrawled beside it. Moving day was a Tuesday. He was at work, the kids at classes, leaving me with the whole day and a rented moving van. I enlisted the help of my brother and a few close friends. We made it look like a whirlwind hit the house, furniture disassembled, boxes overflowing. I left out some of Mark's clothes, his toiletries still on the bathroom counter, just to make it look less planned. When they'd all gone, I sat down on the bare living room floor for a moment. The house, once so filled with family chaos, now echoed with emptiness. A flicker of guilt pierced me. This had been our home, the place we'd built a life together. It was gone now, there was no going back. I walked to the kitchen counter and scrawled a short note, explained in the most practical terms possible that I'd left, where I could be reached if necessary. His phone, keys, anything else of his importance, I left stacked neatly beside it. Then I slipped off my wedding ring, placed it on top of the pile, and walked out the door, locking it behind me. He must have felt the shift the minute he walked through the door that night. The missing furniture, the half-empty closets, my scent erased from the air. And then the note, the ring, the finality of it all. I pictured him sitting there alone in that cavernous house, the silence pressing in on him. It was cruel, maybe. But he'd earned it, he had years to listen, years to change. Instead, he'd chosen Sarah, or excitement, or whatever lie he told himself to justify his selfishness. Now it was his turn to face the consequences, his turn to live with the emptiness he